They sold my entire house over $12. $12! And didn't even tell me. They thought I was just another struggling business owner behind on a flexible loan. Imagine their faces when they found out that not only my house, but the entire county they are standing on was actually owned by me. How far would you go if the HOA sold your home without warning over a bill they miscalculated? Welcome to my channel. If you love HOA revenge stories, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with where you're watching from. It started like any other Monday. I was halfway through a 5-day trade show in Dallas, hustling to keep my company afloat, sleeping 4 hours a night, and shaking hands until my fingers cramped. Being a small business owner means unpredictability. Some months I'm flush with contracts and cash flow, others I'm scraping by. The HOA knew this. We had a written agreement in place, a flexible payment structure on the dues I owed from the pandemic backlog. It stated clearly, in both their wording and mine, that I would pay according to the exact amounts billed, on a timeline we both agreed to. The deal wasn't generous, but it was fair. I'd kept up my end. Every invoice they sent, I paid. I didn't question it. I trusted the math, because who would ever think their neighborhood HOA would try to trap them over 12 measly dollars? About a month before that trade show, I'd called Margaret, the HOA treasurer, and told her I could make a lump sum payment soon. I had a couple contracts lined up, and if they landed, I could send them a decent amount, maybe even wipe the slate clean. She thanked me, said she'd put it in the system, and a week later I received the official bill. It was a clean PDF, same format as always, with their stupid little watermark and header. Willow Ridge Homeowners Association Statement of Account. The total due, $3,188. I wired the money that afternoon and didn't think twice. That amount matched our phone call, give or take a few dollars. It felt good to clear that out. Closure. I remember walking around my backyard that evening, thinking, maybe, just maybe, the stress was finally lifting. The new fence I'd installed last summer still looked pristine. The grass I'd reseeded was starting to fill in, and my old dog Jasper was sprawled out on the porch like a lion surveying his kingdom. That backyard, that house, it was the first thing I'd ever bought that felt like home. And that made what happened next feel like a betrayal of biblical proportions. Fast forward to the following week. I'm flying home from Dallas, tired but satisfied. Deals had been signed. Money was coming. Life was stabilizing. I land around 7 p.m., grab my truck from long-term parking, and make the 40-minute drive back to Willow Ridge. But something feels off as soon as I turn into my cul-de-sac. There's a black Range Rover parked in my driveway. That's strange. Maybe a neighbor's guest? Then I notice the for sale sign in the yard. My yard. My throat tightens. I pull up, heart pounding, and a woman I've never seen before walks out of my house holding a bottle of Pellegrino like she's on a damn HGTV tour. She stops when she sees me and looks just as confused. "Hi, can I help you?" she says. "Can she help me?" I stare at her like she's speaking another language. "Yeah," I manage. "What are you doing in my house?" Her expression darkens. I just bought this place. We closed last Friday. I feel my knees go weak." "Number? No, that's not possible. I own this house. I've owned it for 7 years. That's when a real estate agent steps out, clipboard in hand, wearing a practiced, almost smug smile. "Sir, I'm going to need you to leave. The property is no longer yours. We have a new deed filed, and the HOA signed off on the foreclosure and transfer." I don't remember much after that, just static in my ears and my hands shaking as I dialed Margaret's number over and over. No answer. I called the HOA main line. Nothing but voicemail. I drove to their office and found it locked. A little laminated sign read, "All inquiries regarding foreclosure actions must be submitted in writing." I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't even know they'd started foreclosure proceedings. I never got a notice. No certified mail. No email. No knock on the door. Not even a text. I didn't know it then, but they'd done it on purpose, because they didn't have to notify me directly. According to the bylaws, if a member fails to pay their full dues, the HOA can begin foreclosure proceedings after 30 days of noncompliance, and they're only required to post the notice in the community bulletin board at the clubhouse. That dusty little window no one checks, next to the tennis court. That was their loophole. So how did I end up $12 short? I found out 2 days later when I drove to the county clerk's office to demand the foreclosure paperwork. The clerk pulled out the public record like she was reading off a menu. OA, initiated foreclosure on the 10th of June. Notice, posted the 12th of June. Property auctioned on the 5th of July. Transferred to buyer on the 9th of July. Funds collected by HOA per lien. I asked to see the default notice. The reason they gave for initiating foreclosure? Partial payment received. Full balance not paid. I nearly threw up. I'd paid what they billed me. Exactly what they billed me. I asked to see the invoice attached to the foreclosure case. There it was, clear as day. The total owed should have been $3,200, but the statement they'd sent me said $3,188. They'd underbilled me by $12. They sent me the wrong number, and when I paid it in good faith, they used that $12 difference to call me delinquent and trigger foreclosure. It was like being mugged in broad daylight by someone wearing your HOA's logo. But what cut deepest wasn't the scam. It was the fact that they did it without telling me. They watched me pay. They processed the payment. They posted a notice in a glass box by the tennis court. Then they sold my house out from under me while I was out of town. No one called. No one emailed. No one even left a sticky note on the door. The buyer had moved in. My furniture? Gone. My dog's toys? Gone. The old record collection my dad left me? Gone. And no one gave a damn. They erased me like I'd never lived there. Over $12. I slept in my truck that night, in front of what used to be my house. I couldn't drive. I couldn't think. I stared at the porch light I installed with my own hands and wondered if I was dreaming. The new owner didn't call the police. Maybe she saw something in my face and realized I wasn't a threat. Maybe she just felt pity. I didn't care. I sat there until sunrise. And when the light finally crept over the roofline of Willow Ridge, I made a promise to myself. They took everything I had because of a technicality they created. They thought I wouldn't fight back because I didn't have a lawyer or a rich uncle or a megaphone. What they didn't know is that I had something far more powerful. I had receipts, I had legal standing, and I had time. And what they really didn't know, what no one in that smug little HOA boardroom realized, was that I own a lot more than they think. Not just a house, not just a couple acres, but land. Lots of it. Old family land they walk on every day without knowing who it belongs to. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to pull them apart from the inside out. One board member at a time. One signature at a time. One exposed lie at a time. All because they couldn't count to 12. The morning after I lost everything, I drove straight to a coffee shop off the interstate, ordered the largest black coffee they had, and sat in the corner booth like a ghost. My hands were still shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from the caffeine or the rage pulsing under my skin. I opened my laptop, connected to the spotty Wi-Fi, and began searching for something, anything that would make sense of the nightmare I'd just lived through. $12. That's what they said I'd underpaid. $12 they themselves failed to include on the invoice. And somehow that gave them the right to steal my home, my possessions, my peace. But I knew better. I hadn't built a business from scratch, just to be undone by bureaucrats hiding behind clipboards. I wasn't about to roll over for people who couldn't count. I pulled up the original payment agreement I'd signed with the HOA. It had taken weeks of back and forth when I first fell behind. I was upfront with them. I didn't have stable income, but I was willing to pay. We negotiated a payment structure that recognized that reality, and there it was, buried halfway down the agreement in language they clearly thought I'd never bother to read again. Each payment made by the homeowner shall be made in full, according to the invoiced amount provided and agreed upon by both parties. Payment shall be considered fulfilled if the billed amount is received in its entirety. I read it 3 times, then 5. My jaw clenched. It was black and white. The HOA's own clause said that I had to pay what they billed, not what they meant to bill, not what they later decided they should have billed, what they actually invoiced. And I had the receipts, digital and printed, all of them. I scoured my email archives, cross-referencing every single communication I'd had with them. Margaret, the treasurer, had sent me the invoice. The subject line was, "Per your call, agreed payment terms." The body of the email said, "Please find attached the statement reflecting the payment amount we discussed." Attached was the infamous $3.188 invoice. I paid that exact amount via wire transfer the same day. Then I found the call log from that afternoon thanks to a call tracking app I'd installed years ago. It logged a 15-minute call to the HOA office, time-stamped exactly 2 hours before the invoice arrived. I remembered that call vividly. We had talked about the payment terms, agreed on a ballpark figure, and Margaret had told me she'd email me the final amount for that period. I hadn't questioned it because I trusted their math. That was my mistake. But from a legal standpoint, I had done everything by the book. Their book. And that's when I remembered something else. Something I'd read in the original HOA charter when I first bought my home. Back then, I was just trying to understand how much control the HOA really had. Most people never read those documents. I had, but only skimmed them. This time, I was hunting. I tracked down the charter in my old Dropbox archive and searched for one keyword, foreclosure. Page after page scrolled by until I landed on a section titled Foreclosure Limitations, Property Ownership Exceptions. My heart thudded. It was a dusty clause, probably overlooked for years, but it was there in legal ink. It said, "In the event that a property owner holds active rights or controlling ownership of public use or association use land within the designated HOA boundaries, the HOA may not initiate foreclosure proceedings without a 75% board vote and formal written acknowledgement from the landholding party." I leaned back, blinking in disbelief. Then I laughed, once, sharp, bitter, because they hadn't just broken their agreement with me. They'd broken their own governing document, and they had no idea. See, what no one in Willow Ridge understood was that I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a landowner, a serious one. My family had been buying and selling parcels of this county for 3 generations. My grandfather started it with a few hundred acres back in the 60s. My father kept it going. When he passed, I quietly inherited dozens of land trusts and holding companies. I never made a show of it. I didn't need to. I let the land lease out for grazing, cell towers, and one little airport hangar deal that pulled in cash year-round. Over time, through shell companies and trust consolidations, I gained controlling interest in more than half the unincorporated land in the county. Most of it, the HOA and its members drove over every single day without knowing whose name was buried in the property records. Hell, even the HOA's own building, the brick and glass community center they loved to hold meetings in every month, sat on land owned by a trust I'd taken over from my uncle in 2014. That wasn't just symbolic, that was leverage. And leverage, in a fight like this, is everything. I spent the next 72 hours digging deeper. I pulled every title deed, every lease contract, every tax document I had. I called my estate attorney, Gerald, an old college buddy who owed me a favor, and asked him to compile a clear ownership map. He laughed when I told him why. "So you're telling me the HOA foreclosed on a guy who owns the dirt under their feet?" I told him not to laugh yet. We weren't done. Together, we built a document portfolio so airtight, so meticulously organized, that it would choke a judge with its clarity. We didn't just prove I owned land. We proved I owned their land, their sidewalks, their community garden, their parking lot, the retention pond they use for runoff during storms. Even their flagpole sat 10 feet into one of my parcels. They didn't lease it. They just assumed it was public. Until now. While Gerald worked the legal side, I reached out to a private investigator to do some light recon on the board members. I wasn't looking for dirt yet. I just needed to know who I was dealing with. What I found was illuminating. Karen, the HOA president, was a retired bank manager who had once been investigated for predatory loan practices. Nothing stuck, but the pattern was there. Margaret had been quietly pulling extra pay for consulting hours that didn't appear on official payroll. The vice president, a guy named Joel, had a side business installing security systems and had billed the HOA for his own company's services without competitive bids. They weren't just arrogant, they were sloppy. And sloppy people are easy to corner when the right light is pointed at them. But my true smoking gun came from an unexpected place, a forgotten flash drive in an old filing cabinet. It contained a full backup of email correspondence I'd had with the HOA over the last 5 years, including the original approval forms for my flexible payment agreement, co-signed by Karen herself, including the language that stated no foreclosure action could be taken without a formal warning and mutual discussion in the case of compliant payments, including a PDF copy of the very invoice they had issued to me, the one for $3,188, marked paid in full by their own accounting software, time-stamped, verified, undeniable. By the end of that week, I had something better than a case. I had a reckoning. I compiled everything into a binder, 2 actually, one for court, one for the press if it came to that. But I wasn't just looking to sue. I was looking to cripple them, legally and publicly. I wanted them so stunned, so blindsided, that their only instinct would be to run and hide. And that's when I made the call to the county commissioner, a man who owed me a favor from a land deal I helped grease the wheels on 3 years ago. I told him the full story. He was silent for a moment, then let out a slow whistle. "You got 'em, don't you?" he said. "Oh yeah," I replied. "I've got them by the roots." What comes next? Let's just say, they were about to learn that you never, ever pick a fight with the quietest guy in the room, especially not when he owns the deed to the building you're standing in. They should have backed down. They had every chance to. I gave them weeks after the foreclosure to correct their mistake, to apologize, to return what they stole, but instead, they doubled down. While I was building a case brick by brick, the HOA walked around like they'd just won a trophy. Margaret strutted into HOA meetings with her overpriced handbag and that smug little smirk, as if she'd just conquered Wall Street. Karen gave interviews to the neighborhood newsletter, spinning my foreclosure as an example of firm but fair enforcement. "We simply follow our rules," she told one of the board's Facebook groups. "It's not personal, it's principle." Principle? They stole my home over $12 they forgot to add to their own invoice. And now they were parading it like a public execution, like a warning to anyone else who dared challenge their little regime. What they didn't know was that while they were busy gloating, I was quietly building the equivalent of a tactical nuke. I had already pulled together the basics, proof that I paid exactly what they billed, evidence that they failed to notify me properly, and documentation that they had no legal right to foreclose due to my ownership of association land. That alone would have been enough to shake the pillars of their HOA castle, but I wasn't after enough. I was after everything. So I went deeper. I hired a forensic accountant, a retired IRS agent named Linda, who didn't blink twice when I told her I needed a full audit of HOA financials from the last 5 years. "You think they cooked the books?" she asked, squinting at her laptop through thick-rimmed glasses. "No," I replied, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I think they burned them and made s'mores." She cracked a smile. I wasn't joking. Linda and her team spent 3 weeks combing through every ledger, receipt, and spreadsheet I'd requested through legal discovery. Meanwhile, Gerald, my estate attorney turned litigation general, filed a civil suit for wrongful foreclosure, breach of contract, and financial fraud. He also filed motions for expedited discovery, subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications, and looped in a county records official I had once helped save from a zoning lawsuit years ago. We began building a web, not just of paperwork errors, but of intentional malice. We didn't just want to prove they were sloppy. We wanted to prove they were corrupt. It started with the billing system. Linda's first report came back with 17 examples of payment miscalculations, not just mine. Residents were being charged random processing fees that weren't outlined anywhere in the HOA charter. Some had been overbilled by as much as $400. Others, curiously, had been underbilled, but only if they were friends with someone on the board. Margaret had been adjusting invoices manually, then marking them as corrected due to homeowner discrepancy, effectively rewriting the financial record without homeowner knowledge. In 3 cases, Linda found retroactive adjustments that increased balances after payments were already processed, meaning homeowners were hit with surprise late fees they didn't even know they owed. It was a shell game. Money disappeared into ambiguous categories like neighborhood beautification and architectural review compliance. There were no receipts, no contractor names, just line items. But the real bombshell came when we began tracing the foreclosures. That's where the story stopped being about me and became something far uglier. We found 4 other homeowners, older couples, widows, and one single mother who had mysteriously lost their homes in the last 2 years. All of them had either spoken out at HOA meetings, filed complaints, or requested audits of their dues. All of them had been foreclosed on over amounts under $500, and all of them had received notices that, according to county mail logs, were never delivered. One widow, a woman named Carla, had been evicted after allegedly ignoring 3 certified letters. But when we cross-referenced with the post office's delivery logs, none of those letters were ever sent. They had forged the timestamps on the foreclosure notices. You could see the mismatch between the date on the letter and the actual creation date in the HOA's document history. Linda pulled metadata on everything. One notice was marked as created the 3rd of June, but the system showed it wasn't written until the 17th of June, 5 days after the foreclosure auction. It was fraud, straight up forgery, and felony level at that. I contacted the displaced residents. At first, most didn't want to talk. They were tired, beaten down. But when I showed them the evidence, proof they'd been targeted, manipulated, and pushed out of their homes for pennies on the dollar, something lit up behind their eyes. One woman cried. Another offered to testify in court on my behalf. A third asked if I'd help her find her original deed, because she was still fighting the bank to reverse the sale. The HOA had preyed on people who didn't have the time, money, or legal understanding to defend themselves. But I had all 3, and now I had allies. Behind the scenes, Gerald coordinated with the district attorney's office, supplying them with redacted versions of our findings. We didn't tip our hand fully, not yet, but we gave them enough to raise eyebrows. The county official I knew sent word that the DA was very interested in what we'd found. Meanwhile, I filed formal complaints with the state HOA regulatory board, the county ethics commission, and even the local newspaper, anonymously at first. I wanted to trigger pressure from all angles at once. We were setting the trap, and every string was being pulled with surgical precision. And while we did all this, the HOA kept dancing in the spotlight. Karen posted tone-deaf community updates about increased property values. Margaret issued new fine guidelines that raised late penalties from $50 to $150. They even passed a new bylaw allowing emergency towing of non-compliant vehicles, a move clearly aimed at the few residents who still questioned them. It was pure theater. They had no idea they were standing on a stage I built. By the end of that month, we were ready to drop the hammer. Gerald filed a motion for injunctive relief in district court, requesting that the HOA's authority be frozen until a forensic audit could be completed. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following Tuesday. That same day, I sent letters to every resident in Willow Ridge, outlining, in plain, measured language, what had happened to me, what we'd discovered, and what was coming. I didn't attack. I didn't grandstand. I just told the truth, supported by evidence. Then I attached copies of 3 fraudulent foreclosure notices with the forged dates highlighted. One of them had been used to evict a disabled veteran. The signature on the document belonged to Margaret. The document ID in the footer was 1 digit off from my own foreclosure letter. That letter rippled through the neighborhood like a detonation. Phones lit up. Facebook groups exploded. People who had never questioned the HOA began to post questions. Someone found a screenshot from Karen's old Zillow listing, showing that she had personally profited from the resale of one of the foreclosed properties before the auction had even occurred. By Friday, at least 6 homeowners had filed formal complaints. The HOA office shut its doors, citing staffing shortages. And at long last, Karen broke her silence with a furious statement posted to the HOA bulletin board and the neighborhood website, calling the allegations baseless, malicious, and an attack on community integrity. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because the court hearing was only days away, and this time, it wouldn't be Karen holding the gavel. It would be a judge, a jury, and the full weight of the law. They had underestimated me. They had broken their own rules, trampled the powerless, and ignored the quiet man at the edge of the room. But now that man held the smoking gun, and the best part? They walked right into it, smiling the whole way. The night of the showdown felt electric, like the air before a lightning strike. The HOA had called a special emergency meeting at the Willow Ridge Community Clubhouse, same as always, 7 p.m. sharp. They wanted to discuss escalating tensions and protect neighborhood stability, as their email put it. In reality, Karen and Margaret were scrambling. The residents were furious. The court hearing was looming, and the quiet man they thought they'd buried under $12 was now on everyone's lips. But they still thought they could control the narrative. They still believed they held the power. They had no idea that by the time the meeting ended, they wouldn't even own the chair they were sitting in. I arrived exactly at 6:58 p.m., flanked by Gerald, my attorney, and 2 uniformed county marshals. Behind us was a man in a gray blazer and a lanyard that read County Development and Enforcement. His name was Walter Devers. His presence alone meant trouble. As we stepped into the clubhouse, the room buzzed with whispers. More residents had shown up than ever before. Over 100 bodies packed into plastic folding chairs. Some stood along the walls. A few had notebooks. Most just had their phones ready. Margaret spotted me first. Her smile cracked like old porcelain. Karen followed a second later, her eyes narrowing into slits as she leaned toward Joel, whispering something I couldn't hear. She didn't look scared. Not yet. I walked to the center of the room without waiting for permission and placed a heavy leather briefcase on the center table. The marshals took up positions on either side of me. Gerald unfolded the first batch of papers, thick, official, embossed with court stamps, and signed by a judge that very morning. Karen Whitaker, Gerald announced, you are hereby served on behalf of our client for charges including but not limited to fraudulent foreclosure, falsification of legal notices, abuse of fiduciary power, and violation of county land statutes. A ripple tore through the room. Karen blinked once, then scoffed. This is absurd, she hissed. You're making a scene. Gerald didn't flinch. It gets better. He handed documents to the marshals, who moved methodically down the board table, placing sealed manila envelopes in front of each board member. Each of you is now under investigation for civil liability and subject to ongoing criminal inquiry, with specific allegations of financial fraud, record tampering, and illicit seizure of resident properties. Joel dropped his envelope like it burned. Margaret just stared at hers, hands frozen. These charges, Gerald continued, come with asset freezes, mandatory forensic audits, and, as of 4:12 p.m. today, an emergency court order suspending all HOA decision-making authority pending investigation. Karen stood, voice shaking for the first time. You have no right, she began, but Walter, the county rep, stepped forward and interrupted her with bureaucratic finality. Actually, ma'am, we do. The county has reviewed the evidence provided by Mr. Lawson and his legal team. Upon confirmation of document tampering, we have issued a full revocation of the Willow Ridge HOA's municipal partnership status. Effective immediately, you are stripped of administrative recognition. The crowd gasped. Karen looked like someone had slapped her. You can't do that, she stammered. This is our building. This is our. No, I said, finally stepping forward. It's my building. I reached into the briefcase and removed the final document. It was just one page, printed on heavy paper, with a blue county seal at the top and 3 signatures at the bottom. This is a county-certified acquisition and land reassignment certificate. As of this morning, I am now the legal owner of Parcel Group 1845, commonly known as the HOA's community office, clubhouse, decorative pond, and the parking lot that you've been ticketing residents for using without your permission. I held it up high. You've been sitting in my property this whole time. I looked directly at Karen. I'm giving you 30 days to vacate. The silence was suffocating. Margaret whispered something to Karen, who shook her head furiously, red-faced and trembling. This is a joke, Karen spat. You think you can just show up and take over? You think the county's gonna let you ruin a community just because you had a little spat with your HOA? She was shaking now, but not with fear, with anger. Her voice cracked. I've spent 15 years building this neighborhood into something respectable. I've enforced every rule, every standard, every illegal seizure," I cut in. "Every miscalculated fine, every predatory foreclosure." I stepped closer, my voice steady, calm, loud enough to carry through the stunned crowd. "You stole homes from widows, you falsified notices, and sold properties without so much as a phone call, and you buried it all under bureaucracy because you thought no one would notice. Well, I noticed. And now everyone else has too." I turned to the crowd. "Your HOA has been operating like a private cartel, picking winners and losers, rewarding friends and punishing critics. But the worst part isn't the power they abused. It's that they convinced you all it was normal. They made you think you were the problem, but you're not. They are." The residents erupted into applause. Long, raw, cathartic. Some stood. Some cried. One elderly man near the back gave me a slow salute. Karen looked like she was about to collapse. Walter handed out final notices to the board. "Per county policy, each of you is to surrender all HOA keys, documents, and account access codes within 7 business days. You are barred from holding any administrative office tied to property management until further notice. A temporary oversight committee will be formed from non-board residents until a replacement structure is decided." But I wasn't done. I held up a final document, an HOA reversal order, signed by the County Land Oversight Board. "As of next week, the homes you illegally foreclosed on will be restored to their rightful owners. All liens will be voided, all sales reversed, and every resident you drove out will be offered full reinstatement, funded by the restitution fees we're collecting from your personal assets," Karen gasped. "You can't take my money," she shrieked. Gerald turned to her slowly. "Actually, we can. We've already frozen your accounts pending investigation. You might want to call your lawyer, assuming they haven't read the same documents we just did." At that, Karen sank back into her chair, silent. 30 minutes later, the meeting was over. The marshals remained to oversee the peaceful transition of access logs and keycards. Residents filed out one by one, clapping me on the shoulder, thanking me, offering drinks, dinners, even hugs. Margaret didn't say a word as she walked past me. She didn't even look at me. Joel gave a weak nod, then practically ran to his car. Karen was the last to leave. She paused at the door, back straight but face hollow. "You ruined everything," she whispered. "No," I replied. "You did. I just turned on the lights." In the weeks that followed, the HOA collapsed like a house of cards. Investigations expanded. More victims came forward. The county ordered audits across the entire region. Karen Whitaker was officially barred from holding any housing authority role for life. Margaret was fined $200,000 and is still under investigation. The properties that had been foreclosed upon were returned. Residents held a vote and decided not to form a new HOA at all. Instead, they elected a small, voluntary neighborhood committee with open books, rotating seats, and a transparent budget that anyone could review. As for me, I didn't keep the clubhouse. I donated it to the county library board. The decorative pond became public land. The old HOA office? Now it's a community co-op for local businesses, rent-free for the first year. On the first day they opened, I stood outside with my dog, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, watching families walk by. Peace had returned to Willow Ridge, but this time it was earned and built on truth, not rules. Let that be a lesson to every HOA drunk on their own power. Never mess with the quiet neighbor. You never know what kind of land he owns underneath your feet.